Welcome to Parapsychology Research and Education, also known as Paramove 2018. As you know, we started on January 22nd with live sessions, and we'll be going through February 26th, actually, till the closing session. We have weekly discussion forums every Saturday at 2 p.m. on WizIQ and at 4 p.m. in Second Life. From March through August of 2018, we will have last Sunday of the month discussion forums, again, both in Second Life and in WizIQ. At the end of the session, I will be giving you, if you're not a member of the course as a whole, I'll be giving you the link to sign up for the course in the chat, and some other useful links. In the meantime, I'd like to thank all of the speakers who've given up their time and their effort and their patience to come and join us and talk about their research. As you know, we only have one speaker per day, so we will have plenty of time to go through what Julie has to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank Liz Coley and the Parapsychology Foundation, who provide financial, emotional, and moral support for the Paramove series, and to Brian Williams, who is our discussion co-moderator on Saturdays. So let me move over and tell you a little bit about Julie. Dr. Julie Beischel is our presenter today. Her presentation is called A Survey of Secular American Mediums. She is the co-founder and director of research at the Windbridge Research Center, an Arizona nonprofit corporation dedicated to performing rigorous scientific research and creating educational materials on the topics of dying, death, and what comes next. Her primary research interests include the information reported by mediums, people who report experiencing regular communication with the deceased, under controlled laboratory conditions, their unique experiences and physiological, psychological, and neurophysiological characteristics, and the socially beneficial applications of mediumship readings. Dr. Beischel received her doctorate in pharmacology and toxicology with a minor in microbiology and immunology from the University of Arizona in 2003. She serves on the scientific advisory boards of the Ryan Research Center and the Forever Family Foundation. She's also the author of Among Mediums, Meaningful Messages from the Mouths of Mediums and Investigating Mediums. So Julie, you remember where to pick up your pointer? It's that, yeah, and you have no problems with moving the slide, so let me get out of your way. And
all right, I think she got out of the way. Hello, you guys. Thank you so much for your patience, and I hope this was worth the wait. So, like Nancy said, today I'm going to be talking about a survey of secular American mediums. I'm really excited to share this stuff with you guys today. It's very interesting stuff, but also a lot of the stuff I'm presenting today, you are the first people to have ever heard it. It's brand new data. I've never talked about it before. Some things I have, but a lot of the stuff I haven't. So it's really exciting, and I'm excited that you're sharing it with me. So first, why should you trust me, or why should you care what I have to say? And I've been doing mediumship research full-time for about 15 years. My research is peer-reviewed, which means experts have assessed its validity, importance, and novelty, and where can I think of this word? And found it to be all those things: important, novel, and adding to the field. So, and then the peer review process happens at several places during a research study. So the first time it happens is during the grant application. So you describe a project and you apply for a grant to support it, and then the granting organization committee of experts goes through and determines if your project is indeed important, novel, and would add to the field. Sorry, I want to make sure I'm saying everything. Important, novel, and valid. Yeah. See, I knew I would forget those things. Important, novel, and valid. So the thing I'll be talking about today is development and implementation of a comprehensive survey of secular American mediums. A second time where research gets peer-reviewed in the life of a research study is when the results are written up and submitted for publication to a peer-reviewed journal. So my research has been published in a number of peer-reviewed journals. I've also contributed chapters or edited academic anthologies. Like Nancy said in my introduction, I've written 3 ebooks, which were combined into a paperback book about mediums. And I'm currently Director of Research at the Windbridge Research Center, an Arizona nonprofit corporation dedicated to performing rigorous scientific research and creating educational materials focused on dying, death, and what comes next. So I hope that all of that leads you to believe that I am a trustworthy expert on this topic and that what I have to say is important. So what is a medium? So during a process called mental mediumship, an individual called a medium experiences communication from the deceased and then shares the messages he or she receives with living people called sitters. And at Windbridge, we have 3 main research programs. The first is called Information, which, sorry, I'm getting distracted because this doesn't look exactly like my presentation when I saved it. So the Information Research Program investigates the accuracy and specificity of the information a medium reports under blinded conditions. The Operation Research Program looks at mediums' physiology, psychology, and phenomenology, which is a fancy word for experiences. And then the Application Research Program looks at the practical social applications for mediumship readings. So if you, 15 years of research, clearly we're not going to get through any even sliver of it today. But if you wanted to learn more, I wrote a big article detailing all the studies that I've done, and you can access it for free under the Scientific Research tab on the windbridge.org website. There you can click on, I'm going to use my fancy pointer. You can click on Mediumship Research once you click on the Scientific Research tab. And that's about all the mediumship research, all the Windbridge mediumship research. And then you can access my entry into the Sci Encyclopedia called Mental Mediumship Research to get a review of mediumship research all over the world. And that's on the SPR website. So we traditionally have been working with a team of about 20 Windbridge certified research mediums who were screened, tested, trained, and certified using an 8-step peer-reviewed certification system. And we received a grant to do that back in 2009, and we were able to put that team together. And what we had done was we wanted a team of scientifically minded mediums who could follow a protocol and understand blinding and that sort of thing. So we put this team together, and we've been working with them ever since. And this follows the assumption that you have to do in almost all research. You can rarely study all of the people in a population. So you study a subset, and the assumption is that they are representative of the larger population. And so that's what we were assuming, as, again, you have to do in almost any topic in research where you're studying people or anything where you're looking at a sample, that it's based on the assumption that they are representative of the larger population. So the current project, which is funded by the Biel Foundation and falls under the Operation Research Program, we look at a much larger group of mediums beyond just the mediums on our team. I think I have to go to the next place now. Yes. So again, there's the title of the current project, which we've said 3 times now. So its aim is to identify potentially unique demographic, cognitive, psychological, physiological, familial, cultural, and phenomenological characteristics of self-identifying mediums in the U.S. So in order to do that, what we used was web-based surveys. So people could go online and fill out our surveys. and we surveyed both mediums and non-mediums. I'm going to use a lot of icons like this in my presentation so that sort of at a glance you can get the take-home message of the slide without having to like compare all the numbers and things. So we looked at mediums and non-mediums in this web survey project, and they're from all over the U.S. And to the best of my knowledge, this is the largest study of this population of mediums to ever have taken place. I have a friend who often says to me, no, I'm sure someone has already done this study, but what if, and I would say, no one's done that study. No one's looked at that. So very little mediumship research has been done with mediums in general anywhere in the world compared to other fields. But no one has ever looked at this population of American mediums into the detail and the number that we've looked at. So this is important and novel and valid and whatever those 3 peer-reviewed words I had before were. So this is very exciting that this a lot of this stuff is there are assumptions made about mediums characteristics, but this project put them to the test. Are they this way or that way? So we looked at it, and I'm very excited to share these results with you. So the project used established survey development and piloting methods to create novel web-based instruments. It included quantitative and qualitative data collection and analysis methods and computerized text analysis techniques. It employed both standard, previously established questionnaire items, so questionnaires that were already published and had already been used by other groups, and as well as newly developed items specific to mediums that we wrote ourselves. So the project has 3 parts, code named Octo, Cinco, and SAMS, and so we'll go through each of those. So the online census of traits and observations, or OCTO study, looked at mediums and non-mediums. Both mediums and non-mediums completed the survey. It was anonymous, so no identifying information was collected, and participants completed all the survey items in one sitting. The data that I'll be presenting today is from 316 self-identified mediums. And so the way we categorize people as mediums or non-mediums was based on 2 questions. So there was a question toward the beginning that said, we define a medium as someone who experiences communication from the deceased and shares the information they receive with the living. According to this definition, are you a medium? Yes or no? I prefer not to answer. And then later in the survey was a list of things, and we said, check all the things that apply to you. And one of the boxes was, I consider myself a medium. So in order to be considered a medium in this study, you had to say yes to that first item, and you had to check that box in the second item. And similarly, to be considered a non-medium in this study, you had to say no to the first question and not check the box. So 1,068 people are included in this data that I'm going to present today. And participants who preferred not to answer were not included in the study. So what did we find? Let me take a drink. So the first thing we looked at was demographics. So there were no statistically significant differences between the group of mediums and the group of non-mediums. In age, the average age was 53 years old. The range of participants was 25 to 84. They were predominantly white and predominantly female. So both groups were predominantly white adult females. They also were statistically identical in the proportions of participants in each group of different education levels as well as different income levels. So any differences between the groups cannot be easily attributed to differences in age, race, gender, education, or income. So the main difference then is not age, not race, gender, education, or income. It's that some of them, the one group was mediums and the other group was not mediums. So we can sort of conclude that any differences would be based on that characteristic. Look at my lines are all over the place. That's not what that's supposed to look like. the only difference we did see, this is supposed to be circling the Midwest here, these lines are all connected. The only demographic difference we did see was less mediums lived in the Midwest than did non-mediums. So only 15.8% of mediums lived in the Midwest of our group, but 24% of non-mediums lived in the Midwest. So that was the only difference demographically. And we also asked the participants about biology. So we found no significant differences between the two groups, mediums and non-mediums, in whether the participants, the proportion of participants that were part of a multiple birth, so people that were twins or triplets, as well as the different proportions of birth order, so people that were oldest, youngest, etc. So the same proportions of those groups were similar across the two groups, mediums and non-mediums. We did see a difference in whether or not someone, the proportion of people of being not right-handed. So 21.4% of people in the mediumship group were not right-handed, so left-handed or mixed, and then only 13.9% of the non-mediums were not right-handed. So that was a statistically significant difference in proportion. So more mediums are not right-handed. We also found a statistically significant difference in the proportion of people in the medium group that were gay or lesbian. So 6.7% versus 2.9%. And the people who identified as heterosexual, bisexual, asexual, other, or unsure, there was no difference between groups. So only the people who identified as gay or lesbian, there was only a difference in that category. We also looked at cognitive characteristics. So we saw a statistically significant difference in environmental sensitivity. The mediums had more sensitivity. So we had a list of 24 things, and we said, do you think you're more sensitive than most people to any of the following? We said, check which boxes. And there was things like light, screens, sounds, different substances, temperatures, pressures, all kinds of things. So the medium group, they checked more boxes than the non-mediums. We also looked at psychology. We looked at two things. We looked at personality characteristics, and we looked at psychological well-being. So we'll talk about personality first. So we looked at the big 5 personality characteristics, and the word ocean is used to keep track of those. It's openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. It's a common personality characteristics to look at. And we found that the mediums were scored higher in agreeableness and conscientiousness, scored lower in neuroticism than the non-mediums, and there was no difference in groups in extroversion and in openness. And that actually surprised us. We thought that the mediums were going to score higher in openness. But when you look at the definition of what the personality trait of openness is, it's really an openness to new information. And that, when you think of it like that, okay, that makes sense. Because the people who filled out our survey were people who are on our email list, who followed us on Facebook, who, other groups like the Rhine Research Center advertised our call for participants. So it was people interested in science and interested in science that included mediums and psi phenomena. So they were already like that. Yeah, that makes sense. That across the board, whether you're a medium or not, the people who can hear us, who we have access to, who filled out our survey, they're all going to be the same level of open. So that's actually, when we thought more about it, like, oh yeah, that does make sense. And so then we looked at psychological well-being, and the mediums did score statistically significantly higher on the flourishing scale, which means they had many psychological resources and strengths. So again, the mediums were higher in psychological well-being than the non-mediums. So what we can conclude from this data from the Octo study is that self-reported mediums compared to non-mediums are statistically significantly higher in being not right-handed, being gay or lesbian, being sensitive to environmental and other stressors, being agreeable, being conscientious, and having many psychological resources and strengths. Like a puppy. And we found that the mediums were lower in being neurotic and in living in the Midwest. I don't know if those things are related, but we got to remember correlation is not causation. I just think it's interesting. Okay, that's that. I got to go to the next one. Hold on a second. Okay, so at the Windbridge Research Center, our population of interest that we're interested in studying are secular American mediums. So that's mediums not associated with any formal organization and who hold no organized belief system. So this is in contrast to, that's supposed to say spiritualist. The spiritualist mediums, I need my pointer again, studied it mostly in the UK and then on the East Coast of the US. And then the spiritist mediums that are studied mostly in Brazil. As well as there's all different kinds of mediumship all over the world, and that's reviewed by in this book, Talking with the Spirits by Jack Hunter and David Luke. When we asked people in this survey, are you a participating member of an organized religion that includes spirit communication as part of its services, and we asked the mediums that, only 5% said that they were. So it's the vast majority, if this data is representative of the larger population. The mediums that participated in these studies, this OCTO study, they did, that implies that the majority of mediums in the U.S. are secular. So at the end of the OCTO study, we said, if you are up for filling out even more surveys, give us your contact information, because again, the OCTO study was anonymous. And then mediums identified using those two questions, mediums could participate in the Secular American Medium Surveyors SAM study. And in that study, they were consented, which means we collected identifiable information. And they completed 5 surveys over 9 days. And then the comparative inquiry of non-mediums characteristics and observations, the CINCO study, was completed by non-mediums. And they were anonymous, and they completed the survey in one sitting, because we asked them far fewer questions than the mediums. So 133 secular American mediums participated in the SAM study. That was 14 Windbridge certified research mediums, as well as 119 self-reported secular mediums. And then 234 self-reported non-mediums participated in the CINCO study. Similarly, since they're a subset of the OCTO population, it was no surprise that the demographics, there was no difference in age, race, or gender as well. Again, predominantly white adult females. One of the first things we looked at was fantasy proneness, which is a characteristic that's often examined in people who have anomalous experiences. We used the Creative Experiences Questionnaire, which looked at the developmental antecedents of fantasy proneness, intense elaboration of and profound involvement in fantasy and daydreaming, and the concomitants and consequences of fantasizing. We found that, no surprise, the SAMS medium scored highly, statistically significantly higher than non-mediums. And so that was expected, because again, this characteristic of fantasy proneness has been studied in a number of populations and who have anomalous experiences, and so we expected that. That was really no surprise. We also asked the populations about their physiology, and significantly more mediums have been diagnosed with at least one autoimmune disease than non-mediums. And then we had a list of about 80 symptoms, and we said, which one of these, how many have you experienced in the last 5 years? and the mediums reported a statistically significantly higher disease burden than the non-mediums. And then, so now we're gonna go back in time. We're gonna talk about a different study. So, and why we even ask these questions in this current study. So, in a different study, also funded by the Bial Foundation, we looked at mediums physiology because I have an autoimmune disease myself, and I was, when we would talk, the mediums on our team would tell me that they did too, and so I thought that was really interesting, and it seemed that more of them did than should, than if you just took a random sample of 20 people, then they had more, a higher incidence. So we did a study where we looked at basic psychophysiological and 27 blood hematological elements using a repeated measures design with 5 Windbridge mediums participating in 2 randomized conditions, a mediumship reading and a control condition. And we took their blood pre and post each condition, and then we also looked at blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, pulse ox, and heart rate. And we found no detectable hematological or psychophysiological changes that occurred. So the reading looked exactly the same as the control. So it didn't look like a reading was an immediate stressor on the body. So we thought, well, maybe mediumship isn't what's causing disease. What else do mediums have in common besides being mediums? So what does cause disease? And the hypothesis is childhood trauma and abuse, which can include physical, emotional, and sexual abuse as well as neglect, which has been linked in the general population, not in mediums. No one's looked at it in mediums before, but just in the general population, in adults. It's been linked to problems in adulthood, including physical diseases and a reduction in lifespan. So in the SAMS and Cinco studies, getting back to the present, we looked at childhood trauma using the Childhood Abuse and Trauma Scale, which was listed as a home environment questionnaire during the survey. And the CAT contains questions related to the individual, childhood or adolescent experiences of sexual mistreatment, physical mistreatment and punishment, psychological mistreatment, physical or emotional neglect, and negative home environment, such as parent substance abuse or fighting. The CAT assesses 3 distinct intercorrelated factors: negative home environment and neglect, sexual abuse, and punishment. And then those subscales are calculated in addition to overall score, which is different than just the addition of all of them. There are also questions that don't fall into those subcategories. And what we found was the mediums in the study reported experiencing a significantly higher level of abuse than did the Cinco non-mediums across all subscales and the total to a tremendously significant degree. So, but we were not the first ones to be talking about this. So Greeley noted that people who score high on psych tests are more likely to report high levels of family tension. Sylvia Hartwright noted that stress in early childhood tends to create greater than average psychic powers in adults. And the relationship here that people have proposed is that abuse and trauma causes dissociation, which may predispose someone to being able to have mediumistic or other sort of psychic experiences. It also has been proposed that because if you live in an abusive environment, you don't always know where danger is coming from, where and when. So it would benefit you if you could acquire information about danger when there was no way that you could do that through normal sensory means. So the development of psychic abilities would allow you to sort of create predictive and protective perceptions, so where you knew when the danger was going to come. And then another theory of about this relationship between trauma and psychic ability is that abuse disrupts energetic systems like the chakra system. So we've shown these relationships. Mediumship is related to disease. Sorry, Nancy, I can see your arrow on my screen if you. Thank you. And so we've seen the relationship between mediumship and disease. The mediums report much higher levels of disease burden than non-mediums. Mediumship is related to trauma and abuse. Mediums reported a much higher level of trauma and abuse than non-mediums. And then trauma is related to disease in the general population, just in the mainstream literature. That's been demonstrated. So I have proposed that it is not mediumship that causes disease, but trauma and abuse causes both mediumship and disease. Dun, dun, dun. So the conclusions from the SAM and Cinco are that mediums are statistically significantly higher than non-mediums in fantasy proneness, autoimmune disease, and general disease burden, as well as childhood abuse. And then, like I said, so the mediums in the SAM study were filling out surveys for 5 days, and the Cinco non-mediums, they filled all of their stuff out in 1 day because we didn't ask them as many things as we asked the mediums. So we asked the mediums a lot of other things. So some of the other things we asked about were just their business practices. No, there's conjecture, and people might have opinions about what the sort of average mediumship practice looks like in the U.S., but no one ever asked anyone. So we asked things like, on average, when you perform an individual reading for 1 to 2 people, how long does it last? And so about 40% of the participants said 31 to 60 minutes, 20% said 15 to 30, and about 30% said 61 to 90, so an hour to an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. A little over 5% said an hour and a half to 2 hours, and we had options beyond this, but no one answered them. So no one chose, no one said they were doing readings that were more than 2 hours long. And then we also asked, for the majority of your individual readings, do you get paid? And I was actually surprised that, yes, I charge for readings with only 60%. I thought it was going to be much higher. So that's a really interesting finding. And then about 30% of people said, no, I offer readings for free. And then a few people said, sometimes I charge, sometimes I don't. I trade readings for other goods and services. And then one person each said the following, and these are paraphrased. I used to charge, but I don't now. I only do readings for friends and family. I charge on a sliding scale, and I charge for psychic readings during which mediumship may happen. So we asked the people who answered yes, how much do you charge? And 45% of people said $100 to $200, and 30% said $50 to $100, and 10% said $200 to $300. So about 90% of people said $50 to $300. Nobody said less than 20, and nobody in our population that we tested said over 500. So we thought that was interesting. And then we asked, this is very interesting. Can you tell the difference between communication from the deceased and psychic information about the living? And 127 people answered that question. 97% of them said yes. 2.4% said I don't know, and just 1 person said no. So then the people that said yes, we asked these questions. In your own words, describe your experiences when receiving communication from the deceased, and in your own words, describe your experiences when getting psychic information about the living. And 14 Windbridge mediums and 108 self-reported mediums answered this question for a total of 122. And this is to remind me to say, half the people got the mediumistic question first about communication with the deceased, and half the people got the psychic question first. So they're counterbalanced. So before we were looking at the difference between mediums and non-mediums. So in this data that I'm going to present, we're looking at the difference between mediumistic experiences and psychic experiences. So these are open-ended questions, and people could write as much as they wanted, and they did. They wrote a lot. We got a lot of full descriptions of the two types of experiences. And so, though there were 244 descriptions, like each of the 122 people answered 2 questions. So it was 244 text descriptions, and they were qualitatively and quantitatively analyzed. So quantitatively, we use linguistic inquiry and word count LUC text analysis software, which calculates the degree to which different psychologically meaningful categories of words are used. So it literally counts words in a category, in different categories. And then we use content analysis to qualitatively analyze the descriptions. So that's a classification process of systematically coding and identifying themes or patterns. It identifies core consistencies and meanings within the descriptions, within the text. And so we wrote up our results in a paper not creatively titled at all, Quantitative and Qualitative Analyses of Mediumistic and Psychic Experiences. It was published last year in the journal Threshold. You can download it for free in the education tab on windbridge.org site, and if you click on the peer review articles section of the education tab, you can download it for free. You can also download it right from the Threshold website at tgics.org. So this is to remind me to say the paper is 40 pages long, so there's no way I can get to all of the results, but we'll go through some of the more interesting pieces. So significant quantitative LUC text analysis findings where the proportion of words in the category were higher for the descriptions of mediumistic experiences than for psychic experiences. So for example, words related to social processes like family and friends showed up more often in mediumistic descriptions of mediumistic experiences than in descriptions of psychic experiences. The same was true for perceptual processes, the category perceptual processes, which includes words describing sight, sound, and touch. The category ingestion, which included words describing cooking of food. Past focused time orientation, words like former and previously, and religion, words like spirit and God. So in all those categories, we found that there were higher proportions of those kinds of words in the descriptions of mediumistic communication with the deceased than in descriptions of psychic experiences with the living. The flip was only 1. So we found that descriptions of psychic experiences during readings for the living, the cognitive process of insight, which includes words like discern and categorize, were higher in the psychic. So that implies that the psychic experiences were described as more analytical or more sort of metaphorically left-brained than the mediumistic, the way that the mediumistic experiences were described. And then the qualitative content analysis findings include some of the following. The mediumistic experiences were described, that people described preparing for communication triangulated between the sitter, the medium, and the deceased person. That they noted that they are not in control of that communication. They described the experience of the communication, including sensory experiences. They talked about all 5 sensory experiences. So during the mediumistic experience of communication with the deceased, they saw, heard, felt, smelled, and tasted different things. They talked about their cognitive experiences, like just knowing information. They talked about emotions, bodily sensations, including direction-specific sensations. So you may have heard mediums say, like, I'm getting this to the left, or I'm getting this above or below. Like, so these direction-specific bodily sensations. For psychic experiences, the participants talked about establishing the connection, experiencing the connection, including sensory experiences similarly, but they only talked about seeing, hearing, feeling, and smelling, things that were associated with the living reading recipient. They also talked about cognitive experiences, like that a psychic reading is like a download of new information. They talked about their emotions. They talked about the quality of the information during the psychic reading, that it was bursts or flashes, and that the information was dense or lifeless. They talked about the content of the reading, and they talked about how information during the psychic reading flows from various sources. So they talked about the information comes from sources like angels or guides, from source or the divine, and from non-specific deceased people not associated with the medium or the living psychic reading recipient. And so we thought that was so interesting, that dead people are a source of psychic information. So in the paper we say, this finding draws into question unsupported claims that mediums are using psi with the living to obtain information about the deceased, when this current finding implies that they are at least partially communicating with the deceased in order to acquire information about the living. We said, because we can neither disprove that mediums are communicating with the deceased, nor disprove that communication with the deceased is part of every type of psi experience, it would be irresponsible to posit a general super survival theory for all of psi phenomena. It's always dead people. It would be irresponsible to say that, or to continue to use super psi-like explanations for mediumistic experiences with this new data from 122 people. We said this finding strongly calls into question theoretical frameworks that posit separating mediums' experiences into categories that do and do not involve communication with the deceased, as well as the continued use of terminology reflecting such a separation. And this points to just limitations in general of the language used to describe mediumship. So often the terms that are used are simply theoretical constructs. They're just names for ideas. So using them as if they actually explain anything is called reification, which is the logical fallacy of mistaking the abstract for the concrete. This is also called Whitehead's fallacy of misplaced concreteness. So just because something is called super psi, that does not imply that that's an actual thing, that there's evidence for it, that it's real. Like, it's just a name for an idea. Another prime example of the limitations of language used to describe mediumship is the continued use of the term living agent psi to describe the unsubstantiated theory that mediums are acquiring the information they report about the deceased through telepathy with living reading recipients. This term is imprecise and cryptic because both the medium and the reading recipient are in fact living. So living agent psi, that's not a helpful term. And we should stop using it. So this is the data that I presented that was from the Octo, SAMS, and Cinco's studies that was funded on the project that was funded by the Biel Foundation. But we did not want to leave any data on the table. So while we had people at their computers or at their tablets or phones completing our surveys, we thought, well, let's ask them a whole bunch of other questions too. So the kind of things we asked a lot of other quantitative survey questions. So in addition to the 3 peer-reviewed research papers we're working on based on this data that I just presented to you today, we also collected data quantitatively comparing mediums and non-mediums on their level of compassion, spirituality, religiosity, and fear of death. So that data still needs to get analyzed and reported and written up and presented and shared. We also developed our own survey called the Windbridge Psi and Related Phenomena Awareness Scale. It's pronounced whipper-ass. The second P is silent. And this is a study that is different than historically. A lot of different surveys have been developed that ask people about their belief insight phenomena, but there's a lot of problems with those surveys. The terminology is often really loaded and creates bias and comes with a lot of baggage. So in this survey, we simply describe the phenomenon. People report knowing things that take place in the future. Have you heard of, are you aware of this, and has it happened to you? And so we have all of that data that collected during this survey project. We also asked the mediums in the SAM study over those 9 days a lot of other qualitative questions. So things like, how did your mediumship ability develop? What experience do you have with training? Besides mediumship, do you have other abilities? Did you ever seek counseling or other external support to help you manage your mediumship or other experiences? Does anything enhance? Does anything inhibit your mediumship ability? What is your explanation for why you are a medium? And in your own words, describe your spirituality as it's related to your mediumship. So we have all the responses from the people who participate in the SAM study. We have all of those responses too that need analyzing. So I'm going to give you homework. No, this is a voluntary homework assignment. Nice. That's nice. This totally ruined this. Your number 1 homework assignment is visit windbridge.org. I don't know what this is, but you can join our email list right there. Number 1, join our email list so that I can notify you when these papers get published, when we participate in events, and whenever we post free media videos or fact sheets. So please join our email list. And then for extra credit on your voluntary homework, please make a donation while you're there on the Windbridge Research Center website to support ongoing research and education. Please help us keep our doors open so we can analyze all that data that we have collected during those surveys. You can also follow us on Facebook, Windbridge Research Center on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at WindbridgeRC. So the end. Thank you.